Right. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, so sorry for a few minor technical difficulties, but we're still so excited that you are here for this session. My name is Bella Esposito. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm the program coordinator for leadership programs here at Pitt. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Hesselbein Global Academy virtual summit session entitled Applying Leadership Lessons from Frances Hesselbein to These Turbulent Times. Please note that the session is being recorded. Our presenter for this session is Dr. Lee Patouillet. Dr. Lee Patouillet collaborated with Frances Hesselbein and other Pitt leaders in creating the Frances Hesselbein Global Leadership Academy. Dr. Patouillet and Frances Hesselbein first met in 1993, and she continues to serve as one of his primary mentors. Frances Hesselbein's ideas profoundly impacted Dr. Patouillet's work during his 40-plus year career in higher education administration at 4 major universities, and while consulting with more than 60 organizations. So thank you to Dr. Patouillet and for being with us today, and let's go ahead and get us started.
Good morning, everybody. Clearly my PhD is not in computer science based upon the trials and tribulations of this morning, but one of the things that you learn working with Frances is resiliency. So I appreciate the patience, my colleagues at Pitt, and for all of you being with us today. It is a challenge to kind of capture some of her big ideas in like 45 minutes, but we'll do our best. When you think about Frances, in terms of her background with the volunteer for Girl Scouts, Frances had one son. She didn't have daughters, and she got called upon to be a part-time, temporary volunteer Girl Scout leader, and she responded in her typical way. And then she goes on to become the president and CEO of Girl Scouts USA. I thought Sarah did a great job on her intro. Today, she's the chairman of the Frances Hesselbein Leadership Forum. I'm sorry, let me back up for a minute. She became the president and CEO of Girl Scouts, as we said, in 76. She was there until 1990. Then, as she was getting ready to retire, she was talking to Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker is the father of modern management. And he volunteered a day a month to work with Frances and the Girl Scouts. And she said to Peter, we need a foundation for nonprofit management, and it should have your name on it. And Peter said, that's an interesting idea, Frances. It's fine with me to use my name, but as long as you run it. And she said, well, I thought I'd be the chairman. He says, no, you've got to run it. Well, she certainly did a great job in that effort. Later, that foundation was renamed for Frances. As you heard earlier today, she is the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, really calling out her work as a pioneer for women, volunteerism, diversity, and opportunity. She is the chairman today of the Frances Hesselbein Leadership Forum at the University of Pittsburgh, co-editor of 35 books. You heard from Sarah earlier today that she has received a new recognition, the U.S. President's Volunteer Service Award, and is an advisor to thought leaders in 68 countries in all 3 sectors. She talks a lot about her work in public, private, and social sectors. Frances and I have known each other for 30 years. She's a distinguished Pitt alumna. What's interesting is that Frances never graduated from the University of Pittsburgh, but kept attending classes, and her work responsibilities did not allow her to continue. I served as executive director of the Pitt Alumni Association for 17 years, and back in the mid-2000s, we started talking about this idea. And it was an idea that was a very small idea to begin with, but then Frances says, Lee, if it involves me, it's got to be global. And clearly that was the right approach. Special thanks to Mark Nordenberg and a number of people who were key to getting this rolling. But it was really Frances's ideas. We talked about it a lot, and it's so fun to see this come to fruition. The picture you see, it's myself, dear Frances, my wife Mary, and a colleague, from the University of Tennessee when we gave a presentation in New York at an international conference. But spending time with Frances is always such a joy, and she's always so gracious. Some of you may know the work of Jim Collins. He's the author of Good to Great. So in Frances Hesselbein's autobiography, he quotes, as Frances talked, the general sat utterly riveted for 2 hours. Frances held a commanding presence like Yoda, dispensing wisdom to a gathering of Jedi Knights. So Frances and Jim were working with the generals, and Jim tells the story that as Frances concludes, here are all of these generals, they stand up and go, "Hoo-yah!" So I guess it was a magical moment, but Frances really enjoyed that as well. And we think about Frances from so many perspectives, and here you have a slide of Frances and Yoda. Some of you may not even be familiar with Yoda, so you may want to do a Google search, but he's out of Star Wars fame. And my point here is simply that both Frances and Yoda are relatively small in stature, but they are giants in regards to the power of their ideas. Now we're going to show you a little video clip, which we hope you find interesting, and hopefully the technology holds up. So when you're ready.
Part of what you would see, particularly in the role of Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi, there was a servant leadership quality that I serve others, a greater good. That servant leadership is part of that. You see that today in the world of corporations around the world. People, leaders view themselves as servants, serving others in a greater good. I think you also see the transformational leadership. How can the resistance and the rebellion take on the evil emperor and the empire to transform it so people can realize their greatness and live in freedom and liberty to achieve the human dignity of who they are. So I see elements of servant leadership and transformational leadership, but I also saw greatness and live in freedom and liberty to achieve the human dignity of who they are. So I see elements of servant leadership and transformational leadership, but I also saw the innovation and risk-taking you find in Han Solo. I mean, his name, Han Solo, tells you everything, doesn't it? But this notion of him willing to take risks, calculated risks, but he would always engage and inspire others to follow him, whether it be Chewbacca, he was always working with Chewbacca, or when Luke at the end of episode 4, together, working, collaborating, that sort of risk-taking innovation that you see as part of leadership, sometimes challenging the boundaries, letting the force guiding you. But I think that the servant leadership and the transformational leadership are key leadership lessons that one's taken away from Star Wars movies.
Thank you very much. We'll be talking a lot about servant leadership, and that is certainly a mantra of our dear friend Frances. Trying to narrow down all of her big ideas to 10 is really challenging. One of her ideas is actually a bonus idea for you. It's number 11. Is carry a big basket. Now, what do I mean by that? Frances talks about adopting and adapting ideas to fit your situation. Another way to look at this is think about the basket being your shopping basket or shopping cart. As you go to the grocery stores, you go down the aisle, just put the things that you need in your basket. We should have time at the end to discuss what you have in your basket. Frances's ideas are timely and timeless. And so I think we'll have a great conversation at the end. So please be making notes and be thinking about what are the thoughts that we've talked about that really resonate with you. It's all about you and what works for you. So the big idea number 1, this is Frances, this is our mantra, to serve is to live. And you hear a lot of people talk about that, but this is really her entire ethos about how she has lived her life. And what was funny is when she was retiring and from the Girl Scouts, here she starts, several new careers. So Frances is not one to sit back and just take it easy. Okay. The next big idea is leadership is a matter of how to be, not how to do. Her colleague Warren Bennis talked about managers do things right while leaders do the right thing. let me repeat that. Warren Bennis was a professor at the University of Southern California and a good friend of Francis's. But Warren talks about managers do things right while leaders do the right thing. And this really, when I think about Francis's quote, leadership is a matter of how to be, not how to do, I think that really hits home. In the end, it is the quality and character of the leaders that determine the performance and results of the organization. So Francis says that we oftentimes learn how to do things, but we don't know, it's really a matter of how to be. And that focuses on quality and character, which are really important concepts. The next big idea, and I have used this a lot in my work at universities and my consulting, there's a need for a common language, which leads to a common vision, which results in common ground. There's a lot to unpack there. And what's interesting to me, and this may be the case for you, is people talk about we need to find common ground. And Francis contends that we need to have a common language and common vision to begin with. And I saw that happen in my consulting world. I was working for a school in the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference, and asked to do an audit of the Alumni Association. So I met with the top university leadership. I asked them, what do you see as the top priority for the Alumni Association? They said, Lee, I think they need to focus their efforts on enhancing our database. Because once we have a good database, then we can communicate well. When I passed on the feedback to the alumni staff about the key priority, at least in the eyes of the top administration, they said, database, that's not even our job. That's the job of another department. Well, sometimes we don't have a common language and a common vision and a common ground. I saw that happen a lot in my consulting work and at universities. Things like alumni associations are sometimes an anomaly, and people really don't know what they do and how they work. The next big idea, this is classic Francis, is organizations should be mission-focused, values-based, and demographics-driven. When Francis was the CEO of Girl Scouts and transformed the organization, membership in the Girl Scouts among diverse populations tripled during her tenure. And she saw early on that the Girl Scout handbook and the curriculum had to be more relevant. Francis says this is kind of an extra big idea. When you look at the organization, can you see yourself? And she said, well, wait a minute, this handbook needs to be much more diverse. So does our curriculum. And at the time, it needs to be much more focused on technology. And I think that was really smart. So the mission, why you do what you do. Again, people oftentimes get confused with what a mission is. Values, what you believe, and demographics is understanding your current or prospective customer. I'm a PhD, I'm a researcher, and all this also reinforces the idea of market research. Do we really know what our customer wants or expects from our organization? Sometimes it's just a wild guess. You'll see here, this is a format of what we developed at the University of Tennessee, which was my last campus opportunity to serve. And her work really informs what you see in front of you, a mission, values, vision, and strategic directions. Francis also says you should have no more than 5 or 6 strategic directions. Well, we went to 6 here. But they really drove everything that we did when it came to budget, and the university in response was very supportive of funding us to do what we needed to do. On this next picture, which I think is really an important one, and so the challenge by doing this strategic planning is, do you have everybody in the same boat rowing in the same direction? And that's a question I would ask you all to stop and think about that. Are you and your colleagues in your organization rowing in the same direction? One of Francis's colleagues of mine as well, Frank Bolden, was an African-American war correspondent in 1943 during World War II. Frank interviewed Stalin, Churchill, Gandhi, and Roosevelt, and was a fountain of information and wisdom. Frank said to me, Lee, your people came to this country in one boat. My people came to this country in another boat. But today we're in the same boat, so grab an oar and let's get rowing. So that's a very helpful analogy to the challenges that we have. Leaders need to be great listeners. Transformative leaders are great listeners because this approach allows ideas to be shared that can advance the mission of the organization. Also, those on the ground oftentimes understand the issues better than someone more removed. These concepts also relate to total quality management, but that's a seminar for another day. So Francis says, when you see a roadblock or challenge as an opportunity, it's amazing how you are already halfway there. So I think mindset. Marshall Goldsmith is a collaborator with Francis on a number of books, and he talks about the importance of a positive mindset and seeing those opportunities and as really challenges. And during these turbulent times, that is a critical perspective that one has to have. Management structures, big idea 6. Management structures should be circular, not up and down. Distributing leadership to the outermost edges of the circle unleashes the power of shared responsibility. When Francis interviewed to become the president and CEO of Girl Scouts, she said, I'm going to share with them a model, and we'll talk about this very soon. Well, we'll talk about it now. But the idea would be the CEO would be in the middle of the organization, and there you'd have a series of concentric circles. So information would share really like a solar system back and forth. Francis commented that the person in the mailroom at Girl Scouts was so proud of his role because he saw it as critical in being a conduit for communication both internally and externally. So it's a matter of thinking differently about yourself. I would say in my career, oftentimes, and when I was younger in a particular type of organization, I would say, oh, I can't wait till I can be at this level, and then I can really affect change. Well, that's not necessarily true. Francis reminds us that you can be a leader at any level, at any organization. So I think that's a very helpful perspective to keep in mind. Oh, big idea number 7. Very important during turbulent times. The Lone Ranger is dead. It's all about strategic alliances. Historically, we don't have the resources to do everything that we want to do. Tim Collins talks about the hedgehog concept, and it's the idea of 3 circles. 1 is what's core to your mission. 2 is what are you passionate about, and 3, what are you the best at? And where those 3 circles overlap is where you have the greatest chance of success. And I've used that model a lot, and it's very true. He discovered that in his research for Good to Great. Big idea number 8. Organizations exist to make people's strengths effective and their weaknesses irrelevant. And this is the work of effective leaders. This is a big idea. There are many good programs to identify a person's strengths. Maybe you've been through some of these inventories. If you haven't, I'd encourage you to explore that. I've used strength finders myself and found it to be very helpful. Working with my team helps me really identify where strengths are. So when you have a certain project and you know you need a certain skill set, then you can look at strength finders and help you find those people. Number 9, manage for the mission, manage for innovation, and manage for diversity. Again, this is so true during a pandemic. Francis really is focused on the mission. And innovation, when you think about how we have all adjusted during this pandemic and much greater use of technology, managed for diversity in terms of the audience, the people we serve, the staff that we have. A good friend of mine runs a real estate company down in Tennessee. And this example came to mind. He said, Lee, because of technology in the pandemic, we have reduced the number of offices from 7 to 2. So, of course, that makes sense. But I think these turbulent times have made us all think about things a lot different up than we had before. Number 10, we remain mission focused as we must be if we are to be relevant in an uncertain time. Now, I'm going to just stop on that point for a minute. Relevancy is so critical. Sometimes we think we're relevant, but we're really not. I was doing a consulting job for a major school in Texas. I talked to the top university administration, and they said, what is one thing that the Alumni Association should revisit? And they said it's their alumni legislative program because it's costing us millions of dollars. It's not going well. When I talked to the alumni board, they said, I said, what are you most proud of? And they said, it's our alumni legislative program. It's our marquee program. But our funding is going down. And so there's a disconnect there of what the alumni leadership felt was relevant was not relevant to the university leadership. So to go on with the quote, the abandoning of those ideas that do not further the mission is a leadership imperative. Now, one of the things that we as human beings tend to want to do is we tend to be good at adding new ideas or programs. We're not as good at planned abandonment, which is a Peter Drucker concept about thinking through, now that we've evolved as an organization, what should we sunset? And that's a tough one, because a lot of times we have ownership in a particular program, maybe we developed it, but really think about that in terms of relevancy for you. Again, we're throwing out a lot of big ideas, and we're trying to save time for a discussion here. So here are the 10 ideas summarized. To serve is to live. Leadership is a matter of how to be, not how to do. Common language, common vision, common ground. Mission-focused, values-based, and demographics-driven. Effective leaders need to be great listeners. So during our discussion time, be thinking about which of these really resonates, and I'm sure there'll be maybe more than one, and why. As we move on, these are the next 6. Management structure should be circular. That's really different from how a lot of organizations are set up. Number 7, the Lone Ranger is dead. It's all about strategic alliances. 8, make people's strengths effective and their weaknesses irrelevant. Manage for the mission, innovation, diversity. Abandon those ideas which do not further the mission is an imperative. And then, again, be thinking about what's your favorite idea or ideas here. And keeping with the Star Wars theme, may the Force be with you. Now, we're going to have a time for discussion. And then at the end, I have some closing thoughts and so forth. So I think the good news is that it should now, Sarah and Bella are going to have the opportunity to engage people using the technology that they've got there. But be thinking about your favorite big ideas. What are some of the ideas in your basket? And more importantly, how can you see yourself applying one or more of these ideas into your situation? Again, one of the beauties of Francis's work is how applicable it is to our lives, personally, professionally, our volunteer life. There's a lot of wisdom here. I've studied her work for 30 years. And as I was preparing for this presentation, I found myself continuing to go back and Google things and read about things. And I said, Lee, you got to limit this to 45 minutes. We could do a full day and then some on these pearls of wisdom. So there's a lot there. And so at this point, if we could facilitate or go into a Q&A or discussion period, that would be great.
So if anyone would like to share any of their discussion pieces or ideas, you can raise your hand or you can just unmute yourself and go ahead and contribute your thoughts. All right, I see Rory.
I think one of the ideas that I connect with the most that was presented would probably be leaders need to be great listeners, because at least in my personal experience, I feel like in order for a structure to be resilient is that it needs to be able to be somewhat fluid. It needs to be able to move with the tides and bend and not break under the forces and pressures that it's subjected to. And when a leader is more of a listener, I feel like it's an equally good quality, if you're a leader, to be able to be led yourself, because there's no way that one person is all knowledgeable on absolutely everything. And to create that more fluid structure, I think listening to those who perhaps are more acquainted with all of the ideas and whatever you're leading, that's what's the most important in creating something of success and relevance.
Let me add, I think those are great points. Absolutely. I think we have to be flexible and we have to be very good listeners. And it is true that no one has all the answers and the expertise. And I think that is important. And that's where I think strategic alliances also help you, because people and organizations have different strengths that you can call upon, maybe to do things that you or your organization don't do as well. Great comment. Thank you.
Okay, I'm seeing Jimmy first, and then the email is LaRuse. So Jimmy first, please go ahead.
Well, Lee, first of all, thank you for a great presentation. And I think as I heard your 11 comments that were based on 10 of her basic principles, this one related to mission, value-based decision-making, and demographics probably struck closest to me, and also her commitment to action. You talked about that with the Girl Scouts and making them a much more diverse organization. This morning in Inside Higher Education and also the APLU summary of issues in higher education, there was an article about our commitment to diversity and the increased emphasis we've had about talking about diversity. But the bottom line is we're not making much progress in diversity on our campuses in higher education. And I think her point about action and making, not only doing things, but also causing an end result to happen. We need to be performance-based. It's performance that counts. And so that one resonated with me this morning based on the article I read earlier today.
Well, thank you so much, Jimmy Cheek. I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to tell the group a little bit more about who you are. He's a wonderful friend and colleague. He's the Chancellor Emeritus of the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And when I had a chance to do some consulting work with him and a colleague, Scott Rabinall, it was their vision that attracted me to lead full-time consulting and have my capstone campus experience at the University of Tennessee. So Dr. Cheek led the university through a really transformational period. Jimmy, really appreciate those thoughts, and that strategic plan was very much informed by your thinking. So thank you, and for all your wisdom and support. And then let me add too, the diversity agenda is so critical in so many ways. And Frances has been a champion of that for so long. And but we have a lot of work to do.
All right, and then Meryl, you were next.
Hi. I think one of the things that resonated with me the most was also number 5, leaders need to be great listeners. I think like I've seen that in my own work life and school life, that being a good listener makes you open to feedback, and being able to take constructive criticism from the people you're leading just really makes you a better leader, because it helps you to serve the team and accomplish what you're trying to accomplish much more efficiently. It helps you to get on the same page. And if you can be open to feedback and be a good listener in that way, and not get defensive, then you're able to accomplish a lot more efficiently.
Thank you. Those are great comments as well. I think being open to feedback, not getting defensive, because it's really about the common good, right? And what we can do, and really encouraging people to share their thoughts. Unfortunately, we've all been part of organizations where you don't feel really encouraged to share your ideas, and the organization suffers, but more importantly, the people that you serve suffer.
Aiden, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Patouillet, for that presentation. One of the values I think for me that stood out the most was number 10. The abandoning of those things that do not further the mission is a leadership imperative. I'm involved in an organization right now, and within the leadership team, there's some hesitancy and like apprehension to altering policies that were put in place. And in this turbulent time, it's like, well, going back to basics of, does this policy make it easier for us as leaders to advance the mission and to move the organization forward, is a good question that needs to be asked and is important when you're talking about changing things or just different leadership dynamics. I really grasped with that idea and appreciated that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That is so important that we take time to really examine, what are we doing? Is it, Jack Welch talked about, keep the main thing the main thing. Well, sometimes the main thing changes over time, and I think we have to be open to it. I was talking to a colleague just yesterday, and one of my favorite quotes is, "We met the enemy and it is us." Hopefully it makes you smile a little bit, but sometimes we're not as open as we need to be. And, we love to add, but part of it is you have to think about strategic overreach, and have you done so much that you can't deliver? And there's all sorts of examples in history that speak to that issue too, but thank you for that comment.
Right, Stacy.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for that inspiration. I remember hearing a similar talk last year and so inspired. So it was great to have it be reinforced this year. And I want to share that I'm coming to this conversation from first being an educator, an elementary and a middle school teacher for 15 years before I transitioned into life coaching and personal leadership development for my elementary school students who are now in college, and also the veteran and military community who are, leaders. And I love what you talked about, the abandonment of, I think you said intentional or planned abandonment. And I think it's really important, even in the sense of personal leadership, to realize that as we grow and as we evolve, we might have to sunset friendships, sunset relationships, sunset personal habits that are no longer serving us, because the reality is that, as leaders, our organizations are only as strong as we are. So it's not only sunsetting or abandoning initiatives within an organization that might not be serving or growing or evolving anymore, but even in a holistic level and on a personal level, you, as a leader. So I just wanted to share that and say thank you so much for the inspiration once again this year.
Stacy, those are excellent points. And I think sometimes we talk about the organizational level, but really focusing on the personal side of sunsetting habits or behaviors or those kinds of things that we want to change is so important. I hope you may see some differences between what I did last time and this time, because I wanted to really reflect the turbulent times issues. And so that's great. But keep up the great work, Stacy. Thank you.
And you as well, sir. Yes, I did notice some differences. And also, I just wanted to let you know, I was at my laptop last year. This year, I have to multitask, but I definitely saw some differences. But I also wanted you to know that, I never, as I was teaching, for 15 years at the elementary and middle school level, I never sat to reflect at myself as a leader, of children. And now as I'm moving forward into this realm, you realize the importance and we're also working with future teachers. And I explain to them that you are a leader of children, and somebody else talked about servant leadership. And, it's just really important that you approach life as this whole summit, as a leader. So, and, just as a role model and leader of character. And so thank you again.
Well, thank you. The power of the circular management structure is really key here. And I think everybody can be a leader. And Francis' example about the person in the mailroom, sometimes you might not think of that person as a key leader, but they really are. And so I think that's so important. And also thinking about character, right, which is so key. But thank you again for those thoughts.
I think that is all the time that we have for the Q&A piece. So Dr. Patouillet, if you could please give us your closing remarks.
Okay, I will do it. Well, this has been a sheer delight. If we can move down to the thank you, and then I will put my contact information there for you. It's been a real pleasure having a chance to spend time with you. This next chapter of my life, I've returned to consulting with individuals and organizations, as well as spending time with our grandchildren and my dear wife, and would welcome the opportunity to have a conversation with you to see if I can be helpful in some way. More importantly, I'd like to encourage you to continue to read and learn about Frances Hesselbein. Her wisdom is truly timely and timeless. Bella and team, Sarah, thank you for serving as our host for this session, and continue to enjoy this leadership summit. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
We want to thank Dr. Patouillet for presenting this morning despite some technical difficulties, and to thank all of you as well as being the participants to have joined us for our time this morning. At the conclusion of the summit, just as a reminder, you will receive an email with a link to a survey, and we ask that you do please fill that out at your earliest convenience to share some feedback about your learning experience today. And at this time, we encourage you to transition to your next session using the Zoom links, which are located in the summit program. And thank you again, and have a great rest of your time at the sessions today.